On May 27th, 1997, it was a typical day in the town of Jarrell, Texas, and a tornado quickly formed near the town of Prairie Dell. What initially started as a needle tornado eventually would grow on to a giant 3/4 of a mile wide wedge. But first, we have to cover how this happened and why. Powerful jet streak was going across the United States, more specifically down south. And along with it came extreme winds overlapping, and there was relative humidity spreading throughout the jet streak, and it was just basically a giant air mass. And then, on the 27th, forecasters knew something was going to go down, so they issued a moderate risk with a 15% chance of tornadoes over eastern Texas. Then, just somewhere around 3:40 in the afternoon, a tornado touches down near Prairie Dell. This now needle-like tornado was going to impact Jarrell, and it could cause catastrophic damage. But it was relatively weak until it very quickly intensified to a drill bit. The winds were estimated to be near 200 miles per hour. And then the tornado was heading directly for Jarrell. And it wasn't until around 3:59 when the tornado hit Jarrell. While it didn't directly strike the town, many homes were damaged, but then it came across a small town of Double Creek Estates. More like a community, but then it slowed down to 0 miles per hour. And over these past 3 minutes, the tornado would unfortunately kill 27 people and injure 12 others. This was devastating. And the tornado would eventually dissipate over a forest after being on the ground for at least 50 minutes, while the unofficial duration is 13. The tornado was now violent. But you see, that meant literally everything was gone. There was not a trace of home. You couldn't even spot a home. And if you once lived there, nothing stood. It was like a barren wasteland at this point. Homes literally vanished into the darkness and were never seen again. A man was also pulled out of a bathtub and thrown more than 200 yards away, where he'd be killed instantly. Many victims were found dead, and some were found horribly mutilated, and they had to be identified via dental records. And some didn't even have a body structure left. Some were just bones. And this is about to get very tragic, but a 9-month-old baby was killed instantly as her body parts were found all over a slab of a home. Her mother would be brutally killed as well. And according to the National Weather Service, the tornado had a 0% survival rate in the core. Tragically, though, many horribly mutilated victims were strewn about, with their body parts being discovered as far as 50 yards away. Cows were literally stripped of their hide, and some were seen as nothing but bone. And this was just terrible. And eventually, though, the horror subsided. And in this, 27 died, 12 were injured. However, that number was likely greater. but we'll never know. This violent tornado had enough power to literally yank cars off the ground and strip them bare of their chassis. And this tornado was especially devastating because literally nothing remained after it passed. And it took firefighters and paramedics weeks just to find the bodies and discover whose home was whose, because literally everything was left in just basically nothing. The pure destruction amounted to around 20 million, or it could have been higher, who knows. Objects were found penetrated into the ground, deep into the ground, and large, just, I can't even say it, but this tornado grew tremendously in size. Over 3 minutes, it grew to 3/4 of a mile wide. And so many large planks and or steel I-beams were found penetrated into the ground. Homes were missing their foundations, and it was all because of this needle-like tornado that would end up killing 27 people. And the most infamous part about it was a man by the name of Scott Beckwith took a photo of the tornado showing a multiple vortex F5 tornado. And more specifically, he took the dead man walking photo, which displayed something terrifying, like a Grim Reaper. I can't even say it. Grim Reaper-like figure with holding a scythe with legs and a head. This was terrifying. No one has ever seen anything like this. Aside from now. After the devastation passed, many had to recover. And years later, somewhere in the mid-2000s to 2010s, the town of Jarrell made a memorial park for those who lost their lives. And then the tornado eventually subsided after being on the ground for at least 50 minutes. This had meant that it was all because of a needle-like tornado. It eventually disappeared for a few seconds or a few minutes because it had lost its condensation funnel. So then it grown back into a monster. Everything was being torn to pieces. As you can see here, it still did have ground circulation, but there was no condensation funnel until a little bit later. This was just terrifying. Just knowing that a monster tornado had just torn through your town was just terrifying to think about, let alone an F5. Nobody knew why the tornado had such power. Nobody knew, why it had such a violent core. The winds were estimated near 320 miles per hour because of the way that it decimated homes and mangled cars. Everything in the Double Creek estates disappeared. No matter what it was, no home stood. Ground scattering was also reported when 900 yard-wide swath very close to Jarrell. And the pressure was so low that things were literally being sucked out of the ground in a violent fashion. This tornado clearly caused something that nobody ever could. This was very historic as well. Who knows if we're going to have another event like this. But let's hope we don't. Because every tornado that's ever been like this has always devastated every community that it touched. And Texas had also experienced heavy rainfall and or above average rainfall in the past few days, which was the reasoning to why it had such a slow ground speed. And it was also noted that there was a muddy landscape, which also added to how violent it was. This was clearly no excuse for why this happened. And although it was devastating, people managed to recover from it. And sadly, though, maybe some lives weren't the same after that. And they had to recover from the devastation that killed families, ended entire careers and everything, and changed lives forever. It was all because of one tornado on May 27th, 1997. Nobody will ever forget this, no matter how bad it was. Sure, us humans experience terrible things, but we can manage to get through it. Nothing would ever stop the people of Jarrell from recovering, and eventually it would go down as the Texas nightmare because of what it did to the people.